Democratic Congressman Casten of Illinois did something remarkably rare in Washington, he said the quiet part out loud. In a House Financial Services Committee hearing on housing affordability, Casten sat across from a panel of witnesses and laid bare an uncomfortable truth: that the very administration claiming to fight for American homeowners is simultaneously driving up costs through reckless tariff policy and gutting the construction workforce through mass deportations. What followed was 5 minutes of economic common sense crashing headfirst into political evasion. The witnesses squirmed. The math didn't lie. And the question left hanging in the air was one nobody on the other side of the aisle seems willing to answer. If you deport the people who build the houses and tax the materials they're built with, who exactly are you making housing affordable for?
Regrettably, because that's an important conversation, but I do need to keep this on time. With that, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Casten, for 5 minutes.
I'd just make the quick observation that we could actually cancel tariffs on Canada this week if the Republicans decided to pull the vote. Give some thought at the rules vote later today. I want to talk about the sort of the third rail that we all know but we don't like to talk about because we'll get in trouble if we talk about it. And I think, Mr. Moore, you had alluded to this in your opening remarks, that housing is both an expense, and we get political credit for bringing expenses down, and it's also an asset, and we get political credit for making assets more valuable. And the math that we all know but we don't really like to talk about is that 66% of Americans own their homes. Even greater percentage of voters, and for most of those Americans, that's the majority of their wealth. And so it would be politically suicidal for any of us to go out and aggressively lower the cost of prices unless we follow the advice of Mr. Barr, which I share: supply, 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 right? We don't, that's the lever that is politically possible for us, whatever we think about that in some optimal space. But I think it also creates this challenge where all of us agree that affordable housing is good policy. All of us understand the politics. And you got to watch politicians' feet, because their lips will say things differently than where their feet go sometimes. And so I guess I want to start with you, Mr. Moore, because President Trump has directed large-scale purchases of mortgage bonds, proposed allowing people to put their 401k as a down payment in homes, among other proposals. Redfin's chief economist said that if enacted, those proposals would increase demand. That's going to raise the price, right?
I like that policy.
But just in a vacuum, making those measures per Redfin will raise demand, which means we're going to raise the price of people's homes, right? It's politically smart because for a lot of homeowners.
Well, look, this is a conundrum, no question about it. Because if you increase the demand for housing, then the price of housing will go up. So
I'm just making the point that is good for homeowners. Yeah. It is bad for home buyers.
But if you ask me, do I support Trump's idea of allowing?
I'm not asking you that.
I do favor that. I think it would free up money for down payments.
So then separately, we've got on the supply side, Kansas City Fed researchers said that immigrants who joined the workforce eased labor shortages and helped stabilize the labor market. BLS data said that we have American men have a labor force participation rate of 66% in 2024. American immigrant men had a labor force participation rate of 77%. According to a Harvard analysis, immigrants make up 1 in 3 workers nationally in the construction sector. In major metro areas like Dallas, Houston, Miami, there's 60% of construction workers. Mr. O'Leary, I'd shift to you. If that's the workforce in construction, do mass deportations of the workforce increase or decrease supply?
You have the same issue in farming, actually, as you do in construction. The solution to this might be a compromise where
I'm not asking for opining on immigration policy.
Right.
I'm simply saying when 60% of the workforce is being deported, doesn't that hurt supply? I've been in business. You've been in business.
Yeah,
if you fired my staff, I don't know how to deliver.
I don't agree with you. I don't think it's 60% of the workforce. That sounds
well. That's 60% of the construction workers in metro areas. That's according to Harvard. You're not agreeing with me. You're agreeing with Harvard. It's also 1 in 3 workers in the construction sector. I think any analysis from the Fed is that the sector's differentially affected. So we're in this situation where you have actual policies from the White House that are increasing demand, actual policies that are reducing. I mean, I'll give you another question, Mr. O'Leary. Raising the price of kitchen vanities, does that make homes cheaper or more expensive?
You speaking of tariffs now? Mm-hmm. Well, you know, the tariff policy has been for decades reciprocal.
No. I'm not talking about normal tariff policy. I'm talking about the bizarro tariffs.
Right.
The National Association of Home Builders said that the Liberation Day tariffs will raise the cost of a home by $10,000. You disagree?
Yeah, well, you know, I invest in that space. That's not our challenge. It's an issue, but it's not something we're worried about as much as.
I'm pushing back because you're smart people.
The
basics of supply and demand are not complicated. The only reason this is complicated is because we have gotten to a point where saying xenophobia is bad for the economy, tariffs are bad for the economy. This is not controversial. But to acknowledge that, you have to admit that there are economically illiterate people in the White House. And the sooner we can do that, the sooner we can actually have a conversation about lowering the cost of housing instead of this nonsense that we're doing right now that is pissing off every single American, which, by the way, is bad policy.
Gentleman's time has
Yield back.
expired. The gentleman yields back. With that, the chair.
3 witnesses, people who work in housing, who invest in real estate, who understand markets, were asked a series of questions so elementary that any first-year economics student could answer them. Does increasing demand raise prices? Yes. Does removing a third of the construction workforce reduce supply? Yes. Do tariffs on building materials make homes more expensive? Obviously, yes. And yet, what we saw was hesitation, deflection, and in some cases, outright denial of data from Harvard, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the Federal Reserve. Why? Because the honest answer to every single one of those questions is an indictment of the policies coming out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. On one side, President Trump is pushing mortgage bond purchases and 401k down payment schemes policies that even Redfin's own chief economist admits will inflate demand and drive prices higher. On the other side, this same administration is conducting mass deportations of the very workforce that builds American homes, a workforce that, according to Harvard, makes up 60% of construction labor in cities like Dallas, Houston, and Miami. And on top of all of that, the so-called Liberation Day tariffs, a phrase that deserves its own Orwell chapter, are adding $10,000 to the cost of every new home built in this country, according to the National Association of Home Builders. The math that Congressman Casten was begging those witnesses to do. You're increasing demand, you're decreasing supply, and you're raising the cost of materials. That is not a housing policy. That is a housing crisis by design. It is an economic contradiction so staggering that the only way to defend it is to pretend that supply and demand, the most basic law of economics, somehow doesn't apply when a Republican is in the White House. And this is the part that should trouble every American, regardless of party. Congressman Casten pointed out something that no one in Washington wants to say. 66% of Americans own their homes. That's their wealth. That's their retirement. That's their children's inheritance. And for those Americans, rising home prices feel like prosperity. But for the 34% who don't own those rising prices are a locked door, and every policy coming out of this White House is adding another deadbolt. But the young couple in Phoenix trying to buy their first home? The single mother in Atlanta praying her rent doesn't go up again? They don't have the luxury of not being worried. Congressman Casten closed with a word that made the room uncomfortable: economically illiterate. It's a phrase that sounds harsh until you consider the alternative, that the people making these decisions understand exactly what they're doing and simply don't care. Here's the fundamental truth that this hearing laid bare. You cannot claim to be the party of the working class while deporting the workers, taxing the materials, and inflating the demand. You cannot promise affordable housing while engineering scarcity. And you cannot hide behind political slogans when a congressman from Illinois puts a calculator on the table and asks you to do basic math. The witnesses couldn't answer, the administration won't answer, but the American people deserve an answer. And right now, the only sound coming from the other side is the awkward silence of people who know they've been caught in a contradiction they cannot explain away.